All right, let's unpack the Treaty of Amritsar. Now, you might hear 1809 treaty and think it's just about some line drawn on a map. But believe me, its story is so much bigger. It actually starts with Napoleon Bonaparte and a global power play that would end up completely reshaping the destiny of the Indian subcontinent. So how on earth does that happen? It's a great question, and the answer is what makes this whole story so fascinating. You see, the thing that forced this change in Punjab wasn't some local squabble. Nope. It was a deal struck between two European emperors thousands of miles away. And that deal created a geopolitical threat that the British East India Company simply could not ignore.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. We'll start with that European gambit, then look at Britain's clever defensive strategy, dive into the tense diplomatic chess match, and finally, really analyze the long-term legacy of this incredible treaty.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1807, and the biggest threat to British India isn't coming from a neighboring kingdom at all. It's coming from a piece of paper signed in Europe, a pact that sent absolute shockwaves all the way to the boardrooms of the East India Company.
I mean, just look at this. This was the ultimate British nightmare scenario. You've got Napoleon, the master of Europe, teaming up with the Russian Tsar for a massive overland invasion of India. For the British, this wasn't just some vague possibility. It was an immediate, existential military threat.
And to really get why they were so panicked, you just have to look at this timeline. Over the last 100 years, through huge battles like Plassey and Buxar, they had pushed out all their rivals and weakened powerful local forces like the Marathas. By 1807, they were sitting on top of a vast, incredibly profitable empire. They had everything to lose. So, faced with this terrifying threat from Europe, what do the British do? They don't just sit there and wait. They activate a really calculated, preemptive, defensive strategy to protect the empire they'd worked so hard to build. And this is where we get to the famous ring fence policy. Now here's the clever part. Instead of waiting for an enemy to show up at their own doorstep, the plan was to fortify their neighbors' borders. The goal was to create this buffer zone, a series of allied states that would take the first hit of any invasion. Pretty smart, huh?
So you can see the British strategy in action right here. This period is really the beginning of what historians call the Great Game, that intense diplomatic showdown between Britain and Russia for control in Central Asia. The British looked at a map, figured out the most likely invasion routes, and zeroed in on 4 key regions: Persia, Afghanistan, Sindh, and the big one, the powerful Sikh Empire and Punjab. Diplomatic missions were sent out to all 4 immediately.
Okay, so this brings us to the diplomatic chess match. This is where the British envoy, a man named Charles Metcalfe, has to go and negotiate with the formidable ruler of the Sikh Empire, the Lion of Punjab himself, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And this is where you can see the fundamental clash of ambitions. The British came in with a pretty straightforward deal, a military alliance, but, and this is a huge but, the Sutlej River had to be the permanent border. Ranjit Singh, though, he had his own grand vision. He wanted to unite all the Sikh territories, including the valuable Malwa region, which was south of the Sutlej, all under his rule. And that right there was the sticking point. The British needed a buffer state with a fixed, unchangeable boundary. Ranjit Singh wanted to be recognized as the undisputed leader of all Sikhs on both sides of the river. Neither side would budge, so the talks just hit a complete and total stalemate. So what happens when diplomacy fails? Well, things tend to escalate. And that's exactly what happened here. It led to a decisive military move that would end up defining the relationship between the British and the Sikhs for the next 40 years. Ranjit Singh decided to force the issue. He invades the Malwa region. But the British response was incredibly swift and decisive. There was a short, sharp military clash, and it made the superior discipline and firepower of the company's army crystal clear. Now, Ranjit Singh was a pragmatist above all else. He saw this military reality, and he agreed to come back to the negotiating table. Only this time, the balance of power had completely shifted. And it all boils down to this one crucial line. This is the heart of the Treaty of Amritsar, signed in 1809. It gave the British exactly what they wanted: the Sutlej River as a fixed border, effectively turning the Sikh Empire into the perfect buffer state against any invasion from the north. Okay, so the treaty is signed. Game over, right? Not even close. For both the British and the Sikh Empire, this wasn't the endgame. It just set up a brand new chessboard with a completely new set of rules. And this is just fascinating. This was the treaty's biggest unintended consequence. Because he was blocked by the British from expanding south, Ranjit Singh just pivoted. He turned his incredible army north and west, capturing key territories like Multan, Kashmir, and Peshawar. And in doing so, he built one of the most powerful, homegrown empires in 19th century India.
Now, for those of you studying for exams like the UPSC, this is where you really want to pay attention. The Treaty of Amritsar is a textbook example of that British ring-fence policy we talked about. But here's the real insight, the irony of it all. In creating their perfect buffer state, the British accidentally forced Ranjit Singh to build a much stronger, more unified Sikh empire right on their border. This made a future conflict, the Anglo-Sikh Wars, almost inevitable.
And that really leaves us with the central question to think about. Was the treaty a brilliant strategic success for the British back in 1809, or did their clever solution just kick the can down the road and in the process create an even more powerful opponent for the future? It's that classic problem, short-term security versus long-term stability. Definitely something to chew on.